Chalk Talk is brought to you by Isolite, the emergency lighting experts. Stay educated, my friends.
Good morning, everyone. Usually we like to kick off these Chalk Talks with either a quote or a fun fact. And I enjoy looking up the this day in history information. And one thing I found two interesting ones this morning. One was on this date in 1867, the U.S. took possession of Alaska for $7.2 million from Russia, or less than 2 cents an acre, and for land twice the size of Texas. I thought that was interesting, but I'm sure our folks in Alaska are probably still asleep. The second thing I found out today that I thought is relevant for all of us, especially Isolite and emergency power, is actually Thomas Edison passed away on this day in 1931. I'm Western Regional Sales Manager Greg Keel, along with Eastern Regional Sales Manager Matt Bird. And as you can see, our topic for October Chalk Talk is remote lamp heads. You know, we've sent out some emails and you've probably seen some updates on our website with our offerings. So Evan, our host, our Director of Product Development, wanted to go through some of those updates and changes, as well as calculating why using LED lamps can be a cost advantage. Obviously, when you think of Isolite, many of us think of emergency fixtures and you know, our inverters. So we wanted to kind of touch on some of our updates for those remote lamps and heads. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Evan. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. You know, I knew the Alaska thing, but I did not know that today was the anniversary of the death of Thomas Edison. That's kind of a lighting relevant fact. That's super fun. Thank you for that intro, and thank you all for being here today on the 18th of October. I know we're doing this a week earlier than we usually do, and it's not been that long since our last Chalk Talk, but I'm going to be on vacation next week, so we had to sneak one in because I didn't want to ruin our streak. Now, to that end, as Greg said, we're going to be talking about remote lamps today, and as always, we're going to do it in the 3 acts. We're going to start with sort of remote lamps in general, kind of the what, where, and why of these devices. We'll move over into our specific offering, sort of the what you need to know to buy, sort of how to make the selection, what products have these features and functions available, which ones don't. And then, as Greg said, we're going to end with a little bit of what I'll call the bone to pick section. One, we're going to talk about sort of some of the discontinuations of some of the more, let's say, Thomas Edison era versions of the remote lamps in favor of really focusing on sort of modernization and LED. We'll talk about why that's a good option, both just sort of for the longevity of the product line, as well as it's going to reduce the cost for you guys. And so, you know, I wanted to sort of start by talking like, what are we even talking about here? And remote lamps, you can kind of think about as just like the low voltage floodlights, right? They're just lights. They have no batteries. They've got no AC power connection. They utilize low voltage DC to turn themselves on. Generally speaking, they're going to integrate a sort of a on product LED, but some of the older ones actually have a selectable lamp source where you can throw like an MR16 in there. And the real caveat and the important thing about sort of what this means is they always have to connect to some sort of life safety device. They're not going to connect to like a wall wart power supply. These devices still meet UL 924, and so they operate in a very particular way. So you can't just go buy, you know, some little low voltage DC power supply to hook these things up. Now, these are different from our unitary products and the lamps that go on them, but they are related. The remote lamps can go directly on the bottom, but we're really focused on what it means when they're not connected directly to the body of a lamp. They're different, obviously, from like a traditional combo exit sign, but again, somewhat related because some combo exit signs actually have remote capability, so remote lamps can be run off of them. And you know, one of the reasons why we're doing this, yeah, as Greg mentioned, we've had some changes in the product lineup over the last couple months. But you know, as we've been sort of working on our website in the background, kind of looking at how we can make that a more useful place for people to land in the industry, not just for finding product information, but also for finding sort of general information about the industry and the types of products that we make. And one of the most asked questions on Google is, what is the deal with these remote lamps? What are they? What do they do? And so we're going to answer that question here today. And we're going to start by getting into really like 3 key applications. These are where I really think of as the sweet spots. And so The first is to try to sort of turn an exit sign into a combination exit sign. And this is really kind of admitting that not all aesthetics of exit signs have a dedicated combo version of it. To be frank, we're somewhat limited. The idea being that a low voltage small light can be mounted, at the exit sign or near the exit sign, maybe on the other side of a doorway. This to me is kind of like the restaurant application. This is where I see this most commonly, right? You're going to put a relatively nice exit sign over the door. You need to have emergency lights. It's kind of targeted. Maybe the space is kind of small, and so maybe you want to just put that up above. You don't want to bring more high voltage wires down. You don't want to have something big on the wall, and so you can use a small integrated LED coming off of the exit sign. And so generally low power levels. We'll talk specifically about the exit signs that support this and the remote lamps that they support in the coming slides, but you can kind of see an example there with our thin line in conjunction with an MVI lamp head. And so, like I said, the restaurant solution, the small space, the super targeted type applications there. The second use case, in my opinion, is the one that sort of most predominantly supports remote lamp heads. And this is kind of like the increased coverage for industrial lights. And this is really where we get a lot of overlap of, big battery in a unitary emergency light. It has some lamp heads on it. And then low voltage lights are going to go out to other areas of the facility, of the industrial space. That kind of feels like an inverter type application. And, generally speaking, we'd probably prefer that, or we would say that that's a more modern and sort of a superior way to do it. But there are reasons why the traditional emergency light might be favorable in this application. There may be environmental considerations. There may be some wiring configurations. There may be controls up at the high bay that have some difficulty integrating with an inverter, or that may be not cost effective. And so basically the idea here is you can get a few large batteries. That's better than a lot of smaller batteries, both for maintenance and replacement, but also for what people have to just sort of deal with in the facility. It's just less to go wrong. It's less to go test every month. And then you just put these sort of dedicated remote lamps that are very flexible in terms of the sort of the offering all around the space. And so you kind of get some of the benefits of that centralized inverter, of the less places that you have to maintain, with the expense of you're going to have to bring more lights necessarily. And so it's a little bit of a trade-off, but that trade-off may serve a little bit of a different application. So, and then the last one, and I think this is less common, but I think it's a really great use case actually. It's a way to get a lot less expensive wet location type solutions. And so if you have a situation, let's just consider the same warehouse that we looked at on the last slide. You know that you've got this indoor conditioned space that needs emergency lighting. Maybe you've done the work that we just described. You have one big honking battery in there. You've got a bunch of LED remote lamp heads kind of sprinkled around to do the egress path lighting inside, but you need something right outside the doors as well so that people can get away from the building in the event of an emergency. Well, one option would be to use a little bit more expensive dedicated emergency light that supports cold weather. It supports wet locations. Maybe it's got a NEMA rating, maybe it's got an IP rating, whatever. But that's actually going to be a lot more expensive than just using the additional capacity you have in that unitary light source inside, and then getting an inexpensive, or a relatively inexpensive, wet location lamp head to put right outside. And so what this is going to do is really drive the cost of that installation down. It's a lot easier to waterproof a lamp head than it is to waterproof an entire device that has chargers and batteries and high voltage. And when you're just doing lamps, you actually don't have to worry as much about the cold weather rating. Really, when we do cold weather stuff, is to kind of keep the battery temperatures up so that they'll take and maintain a charge. If you just have the lamp outside, those lamps are going to kick on really no matter what the temperature. And so this is a way to kind of get the inexpensive battery charge emergency light and then put the illumination outside with, that's only just sort of having the wet location stuff out there. So it's really a way to kind of drop the cost sort of down for these types of jobs. And I guess the one other thing that I didn't mention in any of these is when you're doing like a traditional emergency light, like a unitary emergency light, a big box of batteries, if you've got extra capacity there, it kind of can solve that problem of, I didn't really think that this was an area that needed egress path lighting, but the inspector came in and said that it does need it. It's easy to add more in that application. And so that really covers the applications for these devices, but let's talk about the products. And as I sort of traditionally do when we're talking about sort of exits and emergency lights, I kind of break it down into sort of independent categories here. So the exit signs, admittedly, there's not a ton of options for remote capacity. That's something that we're actually working on as we're working on a couple new exit signs right now. All of them are going to come with remote capacity. As it is today, you'll notice that there's an EB option on the thin line, the CMB, the RLC LED, and the DCL. The EB in those applications means that they have remote capacity. You got to look at the cut sheet though, because EB has double usage. Sometimes we use it for just extra battery, which means that it's going to extend the runtime. Sometimes that extra battery means we've got additional wires out that are at a particular voltage that will run the remote lamp heads. The other thing to keep in mind here is because the exit signs are relatively small, just sort of in terms of their volume, they don't have a lot of room for additional battery. And that's really what we have to do when we add remote capacity. We're adding battery for those lights. And so to that end, when you're going with these exit signs, you're going to be using these lower wattage remote lamp heads. So the MVI, the PMR, the MVH. There's really going to be limited to that. Now, when you get over into the emergency lights, this is where you kind of get that a la carte menu thing again. This is where we're talking about all of those big box emergency lights. So you can see them down there. I'm not going to sort of go through that. We have a lot more options in terms of the lamp heads that are used. All of these are sort of steel and metal. Some of them actually have various options in terms of the lamps that go inside of them. They support LED, MR16, or tungsten lamps. This is really where you're going to get all of the flexibility. This is what's going to sort of deal with those more industrial and wet location type applications. It's going to be this product set in conjunction with those lamps. The one caveat I will say is when you're selecting the body, like you see down at the bottom, and then the lamp and lamp head, generally speaking, you're going to have to match up voltages. So if you've got an ELH with a 12-volt battery system, you're going to need the NRH from up above that also uses the 12-volt lamps. So that will be the 12-volt LED, the 12-volt MR16, the 12-volt tungsten, whatever it is. The multi-voltage heads you don't have to worry about as much, but for everything else, you got to make sure that your voltages and the capacities kind of line up there. Now, I said this was mostly industrial, but we actually do have some of our architectural indoor emergency lights that support remote capacity. You can see the bug there. Our RL2 LED also actually supports a little bit of remote capacity. Again, what you can look at is that EB option in those applications. And because of the size of an architectural emergency light, generally these have some of the same limitations that you're going to see on the exit signs. They're going to be limited to those sort of lower wattage multi-volt heads like the MVI, like you see over on the right. Now, as Greg mentioned at the beginning, and I sort of followed up with, we have really changed our cut sheets recently. And we still offer a lot of different lamp heads, and you can get those quoted through us. But if you notice on our cut sheets, like you see over there on the right, we've actually sort of changed it so that we don't have all of these relatively confusing lamp tables, and we've really just focused on the LED offering of the products. And so when you look at the ELH or these lamp heads, for example, you're only going to see the LED options that go along with it. Again, you could quote the other ones with us, but we really think that this is kind of the way to go. One of the things that we get pushback on is, you look at the cost of like a traditional, incandescent or tungsten bulb, and then the cost increase associated with going to an LED, and people say, well, that's going to drive the cost of this installation up. But the thing that's missing from that analysis is that those LED lamps, if you look at the IES files and you actually throw in an AGI 32 or Dialux or whatever tool you use for photometry, you're going to see that the sort of the amount of light you get out of an LED for an equal wattage is going to be 6, 7, 8 times. And so instead of using a 16 watt MR16, you can get away with a 2 watt LED. And what that does is it reduces the battery cost for that system by much more than the increased cost of the LED. And so reducing the cost of the battery by 6 or 7x, or reducing the size of it by 6 or 7x, reduces the cost a lot more than adding the LED lamp on there. So this is actually a cost advantage just on the purchase order price, but it also has advantages really all throughout the life cycle of the project. You know, if you've got a MR16 bulb or a tungsten bulb, those things burn out, right? The entire industry has moved away from those technologies in favor of LED because, you know, they effectively live forever. That's really a nice characteristic to have of an emergency light, because you don't want to have to worry about that going out when you need it. So the other thing to this puzzle is to sort of streamline that offering. We have discontinued, in a very Halloween appropriate set of graphics here, a bunch of our less often used lamp heads and lamps. And so you can see the list there, things like the ARH, BRH, the LRH, some of those sort of inexpensive plastic heads that were really designed for like wedge base, incandescent, and par lamps. They're gone. And so we've removed those lamp types in favor of keeping some of the more modern lamps and the lamp heads that support that. So the lamp heads that support it are going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit more, and we still have all the options that you would need for both indoor and outdoor applications. With that said, that's my my pitch here for the last Chalk Talk before October, or before Halloween. You notice the Halloween graphics. I'm starting to get in the spirit. As always, all this stuff is already on the website. So those changes that we mentioned that we've made to the cut sheets, the discontinuation markings, we've already published all of that. So check that out on the web if you're curious what the product line looks like right now. And as always, as a follow-up to this presentation, you're going to get a version of the presentation of me giving it. So you'll hear my audio from one of the recordings, as well as just the raw slide deck. So if you want to give this presentation to other people within your organization, or to your family, or to random trick-or-treaters who come to your house, feel free to do that. We'll absolutely make that available to you. As is always the case, I'm Evan Ackman. Greg and Matt are on the line. We certainly appreciate everything that you guys do for us. And so if you want to talk more about remote lamp heads or anything else that we do, please don't hesitate to reach out. We answer our phones and email, and we love supporting you guys in any way possible. As Greg just mentioned in the chat, don't forget about the pumpkin carving contest. As always, we will have great prizes up for grabs. We don't yet know what they are. Sometimes we tailor it to the winner and their contest entries. So, don't forget to be creative and have some fun with it. With that said, have a great day. I'll stick around for questions, and we'll see you next month, where I think we're going to have a new product announcement.